one more for a full quorum. I think Tim had responded that he was going to be here. So, but right now we don't have anything to vote on until the minutes later in the meeting. So we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for everybody for joining us. New location for second meeting in a row, but this is another good one. Thank you to Virginia Energy for finding that. Let me start off with a quick safety message before we get into everything. I actually had one in our company yesterday that I'm going to steal because I thought it was a good one. But since we're getting into the holiday season, I don't know about you all, but my kids at least love to go out and drive around looking at Christmas lights. And it also makes me realize that there's a lot of other people doing that this time of year and maybe not paying quite as much attention on the roads as they're driving. So as we're going around and driving this time of year, just to be a little bit of extra conscience that that's probably there's going to be a lot of people out on the roads doing that. And it reminded me of a story, or not a story, something that actually happened to me when I was a little kid going out with my parents and looking at holiday lights. My dad was paying attention to the road, I think, but we were looking at lights and not necessarily paying attention to what was happening in the car because I was leaning out the window trying to look at all the lights as he was rolling out the window while I was still leaning out. So thankfully didn't do much other than leave a little mark on my chest, but it did remind me that
he didn't do it on purpose.
He didn't do it on purpose. That was for sure. He just, he was looking at lights and watching everybody around you. So anyway, just keep an extra bit of awareness both inside and outside the car this time of year as folks will be looking at the holiday lights and doing all that this year. So.
And just these days, your kid can tell a story about what you did.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully not the same, but
Tom, could I also suggest that if you're walking to look at the lights, you wear something reflective? I see lots of people with all black.
yes.
They're asking for it.
That's a very good point. Or if you're out this time of year, because we talked about this the last time, it's getting darker much earlier these days. So if you're, either in the morning or in the evening out for a run or a walk with the dog or whatever, always a good idea to have the reflectors on if possible. Great. Okay, so I think we all know each other now. I did want to mention there were some renominations, but also for our first meeting next year, Dan Stoddard, who's the Chief Nuclear Officer for Dominion, has actually been nominated and will be taking a seat on the authority. He couldn't be here today just because he was just nominated and had a conflict, but I know he plans to join us at our first meeting in 2022, which would be great.
Those appointments were published Monday.
Yeah, they were published on Monday. So I think Dan was the only one that was a new appointment as opposed to reappointment. And Jeff, now I think you're officially appointed, nominated as we say. So that would be great. Anything else, introductory remarks that we need to hit, Grant or Larry? I think we're good on the policies and everything. Yeah. Okay. So then we will move into an update on the decarbonization plan discussion and kind of where that's.
Yes, and the only substantial update from when we last spoke is that the plan is now moved to the governor's office. It's been sent up for their approval. Christopher, the energy program director, who spoke at the last meeting, he did just send a note to, I think he mentioned this the last meeting, to kind of reiterate how nuclear was treated in the draft report. So he says, since the purpose of the report required by the Clean Economy Act is to determine how the decarbonisation goals of the Act can be achieved at least cost to ratepayers, the baseline case of the model assumed all of the goals in the Clean Economy Act would be met on the timeline specified in the Act to reach zero carbon generation by 2045 for Dominion, 2050 for APCO. The Act makes no changes to nuclear generation. Nuclear generation is considered carbon emission free and remains constant throughout the policy horizon. Hence, the baseline case and all the scenarios model, Virginia's 4 nuclear reactors are relicensed by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for operation beyond 2050. And that's where he ends. I think the implication is they only modeled the existing nuclear and did not consider additional nuclear.
Okay. So process-wise, it's with the governor's office now, and then will it be published end of the year? Do we know what the timeline is for?
I mean, I should have checked, I know it's meant to be published in time for the General Assembly.
Okay.
2022, for that precise date, I think it's probably January 1st.
And are there specific policy recommendations for the assembly, or is it more just publishing the modeling based on the policy?
I do the recommendation, yeah, I think that's a bit large part of the governor's office deliberation will be decided. The conclusions will be.
Okay. All right. So it would be great if we can know, maybe Brandy, as the process keeps moving forward, because I imagine it'll be published before our next meeting, if we can get that out to the authority, just so we can take a look at what is published. Yep.
Will they be aware of the Consortium working with VNECA on this as well? Is there going to be some, or is it just going to be Northern's recommendations?
I can't be truly sure, but my understanding is we'll be looking forward.
Great, okay, so yeah, if we can, see that, get a copy of it.
Okay, I just didn't catch what you said. I know you said you couldn't be sure, but.
Yeah, that's my understanding is it's
Probably.
the current administration who will sign off on the report.
Got it.
Any other questions on the process or?
So I just think that, when it does come up, you may want to then have a letter in response how to include new movement.
Yeah.
It needs to be considered.
Yeah, I think that's a good. Yeah, because, and understanding, better the methods behind the modeling and what was included or whatnot, and least cost. As we talked about last time, I think with Al, it's going to evolve, right? So, this isn't the last, bite at the apple, let's put it that way, in terms of the way that process would be implemented. I think one of the reasons I was thinking about this, I think it's a good thing to keep in mind, is depending on where things go with the Build Back Better proposal, which we can talk about, later, but there's some significant incentives in that bill that may change the economic modeling for things like new nuclear, especially new nuclear at retired fossil sites. I mean, there's some, I haven't taken a specific look at what it'll do to the economics, but I imagine a 40% tax credit for any new clean resource is going to change things pretty drastically. So it's something it will be something to keep an eye on. So that's good. Okay. Any other questions on that one? Okay. April, I will turn it over to you for the VNEC update.
What is the Build Back Better proposal? We're not supposed to find out until next week. I gotten a note that says no, but I haven't gotten a note that has asked any questions either. So I did call the other day. Grants.gov has 24 hours service. But they're very nice. And we're still in the process, so we'll see. Again, I will just reiterate, this may not be the right place, for this grant. Supported for us, but I think there'll be other opportunities. We are going to start some of the conversations that need to be had that are in the grants, just talking about siding, looking at, supply chain. I'm gonna put together a meeting for January, early February, with the industry, and all those that participated in the grant. I think that even though we don't have some of the funding, there's still some conversations that we can have to start stepping forward in the process. So we're working on that. And then I gave you all an outline for the hub proposals. The universities are still working with the writer right now. There's still a couple things they're trying to work through. So I didn't have the proposal itself to, a draft proposal to give you today that, I felt comfortable with where they're at right now. But we're close. I will say the writer has done a very good job working with the universities and trying to narrow down the focus and making sure that, you know, this is set up to be achievable goals. So, as soon as I do have the draft to you, I will get it, to you. It's just a work in progress, and I will just honestly tell you, I just think they're going in a good direction. And it's just taking some time, and there's just some conversations that need to be had before we can put it in it. We're not, definitely not rushing to put it together, we're just taking our time. I always stress to them, I want to think about longevity. This is the organization that can stand on its own, and they're really looking on how to do that in a phased out process. I don't think I have.
I think it might be useful, if everybody wants to take a couple of minutes and just look through the proposal outline, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about that and ask folks have questions, and then we can talk about maybe next steps, in terms of the, actually looking at the formal proposal when it's ready, and let it go from there.
Still wanted to have, I am, working to get in touch with the governor-elect, Kim, and just tell me about the strategic plan and what we've been doing. Just trying to make sure that we are, I would love for the governor's energy plan this time around to include nuclear. Really important, really stressing that. And I'm also working with the VNECA Energy Workforce Consortium to also make sure that nuclear, not just the energy workforce is included, and there's such a need and it's important to the energy workforce. Also included in energy. On Friday, tomorrow, the chamber is releasing their blueprint. I've been told that several of our items for from the strategic plan has been included. I have not seen it, so I don't know which items are, but just to make that will be out tomorrow.
So April, have you actually made contact with the transition team? Other than reaching out on that?
Yeah, we reached out. I was actually, someone called me just yesterday and wanted me to some input. So I was waiting for a call. But we have been reaching out. One thing to note is Senator Newman, who, one of the reasons why we're all sitting in this authority is one of the patrons for putting the VNECA and VNECA together. He is on the transition team, so, you know, spoken to him. So I think, you know, every administration, it just takes them a little while to get going. Once I think they start making appointments, we'll start seeing more.
So the question, is that a virtual hub or is there a place? And if so, do we know where it will be?
That is a question that is under conversation. Right now, it will be something, a virtual. I'm hoping that they'll have a person in place, like an executive director, to help manage. I don't know where that person will sit. But they hope to strive to have brick and mortar at some point, but not straight away.
If I may, I believe some of the discussion was it would be a rotating executive director based on,
We've changed that.
has that been changed?
We've changed some of that, yes. It's a lot different from what the original one you see. I mean, I'm not gonna say a lot. There's some differences on management. I've stressed to them to actually hire somebody that leadership from the universities will be rotated.
So, yeah, let's take a minute and just take a look at the outline, because I have a couple, maybe more detailed questions we can get into. All right, I have a few questions, but do folks have questions to start off? Andrew? Yeah.
Do we know what they're actually going to do? I mean, for example, there's a physics consortium in the Tidewater area where the universities can exchange course credits and things like that. Something like that envisaged here, because it's actually beautiful words, but didn't tell me what you're going to do.
I know, and honestly, that is part of some of the things that they're working on right now, but I mean, ultimately, they would like to build something, obviously. But they also are trying to look at what research opportunities are out there and together, work together to go after some money. Do I have a specific thing that they're gonna mainly focus on? No, I think they're just trying to work with the industry. Right now, we will be talking to the industry leaders, and I'll want to talk to you afterwards. And try to get more input to make sure that they're going in the right direction. I still stay pretty strong on this, is that, one reason why we're here with the universities and industry working together, even the hub has to maintain that. So would they have to have industry buy-in on what they're doing to make sure they're supported?
So Andrew, one that I've had the opportunity to have some interaction with the folks that are working on this. One of the things, at least I know April stressed and I recommended is, and April references, but is to set up the structure to propose what they can do. I think sometimes there's an interest in jumping to, well, let's just start going after projects, that's not a bad thing to be, that's good motivation, but at the same time, trying to not just be let's go do one or two things and then that's it, but let's set it up so those one or two things can be a part of a long pipeline of portfolio stuff. So I think that's part of the kind of as I understand it, the next steps once everything, the proposal is kind of in place and the structure to pursue these projects is in place, that they would.
And one thing, we stressed early on is they worked in developing like their capabilities. What is the capabilities list? Like, what do we have here in Virginia? And what things can they be focused on, work together? What's successful here? What are they going to be successful at as well?
Other questions? I have a few, so. So, one of the thoughts that came to mind. So this is a great group of universities doesn't necessarily cover all the entities or universities, research organizations in the Commonwealth. Is there going to be a process for adding
Yes.
additional members or entities?
Yes, and we also, what, we have a list of organizations that we want to reach out to as they get a little bit further. Hopefully we can have out here shortly, but as we get a better draft, I want to reach out and make sure that we have groups that will sign on and support and be able to work with as well.
Because I mean, it's
Yeah.
interesting, Andrew, you were raising there's the kind of group of, down in the Tidewater area, that seems like that might be a natural potential, even if they're not part of the hub, but maybe there's some sort of collaboration opportunity there too.
I thought it was the first thing you can do that is free. Don't need money,
Right.
and it shows a level of collaboration. I think is good.
But also with your organization, so that there, there's anything that the universities and you all can together on, there's the relationship there.
So I know BWXT has this big thingy that moves around and does earthquake tests. Is that something that could be made accessible to universities, things like that? Or facilities in, that would really sort of integrate the universities with the facilities in the existing industries. I think that would be really good.
And I told you, right now it is the smaller group of just working on it, but I believe it's kind of setting the foundation. And as we talk to other groups, well, I think it is going to get a little bit bigger. But there will be ways for other groups to come in, there'll be partnerships. But I think they needed to work out a few things. It's nice that, I think through this process I've learned it's like building a house. Yeah, I want to build a house. But, you have to think about the tile racks, the baseboard, what flooring you want. These are questions that we're trying to figure out, but then open up to have bigger questions of making sure these choices are the right choices.
Yeah.
Maybe get the framing straight first.
The foundation. Make sure there aren't any cracks in the foundation. So can we talk a little bit about, you mentioned some of the evolutions in terms of the kind of leadership governance structure. Can you go into a little bit what the current thinking is in terms of how it would be kind of organizationally set up?
I can give you a general overview right now. Again, I'm stressing that they have an executive director. I think there always needs somebody making sure the trains are running on time. I think the professors, I think they're talking right now is Ali from Virginia Tech would be the chairman for the first big 2 years of the year. I'm not sure how it's going to count. But then we have a governance board, they have an industry advisory committee. There's going to be different levels, different groups to help guide them going forward.
Good. Okay, so it's a, like you said, it's a board with advisory committees, but then also like a dedicated director.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And
And you can always stress that too, because I'm, from being in my job, I just believe in someone needs to keep the trains on at any time.
totally agree, totally agree. And is there a process or intention to kind of spell out what they have in terms of role and responsibilities of the different positions? I guess that would be.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, that's some of the things that we're working out right now is how, what we need to, when do we need to have these, check-ins basically. I think the other day we had a long conversation, just making sure that, we have follow-up after meetings and making sure, yes, we may have a plan, but if the plan has to deviate, make sure to record that and get that back and take in feedback from the department organization. So they're working on some conversations about how the management of the organization.
This is a totally independent group. They don't report to anybody.
Oh,
How does this work?
that's a good question, but no, I mean, they be independent, I'm not sure how it's gonna branch out from the authority in the VNEC and also within the universities themselves, right? So I think there's some questions on that, but I always see that this is probably gonna be some sort of still, it's not like, the authority is going to oversee what they're doing, but our goals are all the same, and making sure our goals stay. I don't know who, independent, yes, but, there'll be some oversight. I think there's definitely collaboration between the industry and other partner organizations.
Well, and one thing that might be interesting, you're talking about how the governance structure is being set up. You're gonna have a board that it sounds like it's made up of members of, universities. And, some sort of advisory committee structure, whether it's industry or other outside experts. So they're going to have some, just like you would have kind of a structure, a corporate structure with a
Yes.
board and a director. So there's accountability there. I think it'll also depend on what are the funding sources, right? What are the
That's
projects
what it
that
is.
folks are going after, right? Because if it's like we have now, where there's funds administered through, NECA but from the assembly, there's requirements that will come with that, I'm sure, so. But
Some of those things, I just don't have the answers.
right, and then, yeah, I think that's going to evolve. The good thing that you all seem like it's headed down is there'll be a structure and someone actually go out and pursue that stuff. Which is I think the key thing.
It does consider a management structure like this, with the poor executive director being beaten up by a large selection of people above him.
Not always the case.
This will be more effective with lots of people doing stuff.
I think Tom went to it earlier about what's going on at the federal level. Scott and I were on a call the other day, I don't think we were on that call, just talking about just reconciliation bills and things happen there. And right now, there's money in Department of Energy, so there has to be someone, just the one grant that we've done, there has to be somebody in charge.
Well, yeah, I would hope it'd almost be like a structure that would go up and out,
Yeah.
right? Like you've got the advisory board, just like you have, I would hope the executive director would be able to draw on resources from members or the people, or the entities that are interested in actually doing and going after the projects, right? So that could reach to your organization even too, right? If there's collaboration.
Yeah, so as I sit here and listen to this, though, it sounds to me like you've got another potential organization whose ultimate goal is very similar to the objectives of VNEC and VNECA, and largely comprised of the same organization. So it just disturbs me a little bit that you have two organizations that are composed of the same members seeking potentially the same objectives. And the question is, how are they coordinated? And the authority is supposed to provide oversight over what Consortium does. Now you have another organization made up of the same members that does not have that oversight, and I'm just wondering how all this works together. I mean, how in the final analysis, how does this all gel to meet the ultimate?
The question that keeps me up at night. Do I worry about that? I do. The only difference I would say is that, as the consortium, we don't do research. That's not, our job has been to bring the industry and the university together to work towards a common goal. Having research has been something that has been a topic of conversation from day one. Needing more research dollars here in Virginia. It is something that Sama and Ollie both have preached about the whole entire time, that we have such a great industry here in Virginia. We have all these great universities and stuff, but when it comes to research dollars, Virginia does not get equal. It's not equal on as to other states. And so the thought process is to come together more organized on that front, that some of that can happen here. So I get your concern, some players, but this is gonna be a vehicle to move, as I see it, to move to get some of the research dollars into here in Virginia. But do I understand your question? Totally. I mean, and as those groups get bigger, it's making sure that we still keep all going in the same direction. It's a little hard.
Yeah, it just seems to me that at the very minimum, if and when this happens and you have that independent executive director, it seems like we ought to have an expectation, or they ought to have an expectation, that they brief this group.
Absolutely.
Totally agree.
With each meeting about what they're doing, what they're looking for, what research they're pursuing, and all of that, because the idea is yes, it's a good idea to go out and get research, there's no question, and certainly Virginia's flag on that. But that research has to be directed towards something that is of interest to the other parts of the industry.
And one of the things I've tried to do throughout this last year is to meet with industry, to actually kind of go for this whole year and to listen, not just assume, but listen to what the needs are. Because, I mean, I don't think, I don't know, just think it's with nuclear, I just don't think we always listen to each other on what the needs are. And I've been really stressing that. The writer has stressed that. You know, we have we're going to go back to the working group. There's some checks and balances to just make sure that things are thought through and it's just not a grand wish list.
Well, and the other thing too, I go back to, how did this concept come about in the first place, right? This grew out of the strategic plan that VNEC and VNECA worked on, right? This was one component of that. So I see this too as being an opportunity this is how we're implementing that piece of the plan, but it doesn't, and then frankly, it frees up VNEC to be pursuing the other, I think there were 4 more key. No, there's a bunch of other things on the list, right? But I see it as, right, so this would be an opportunity to have a dedicated organization that's going after the specific aspect. It does need, I agree, and that's why I think it's good that it will have an industry advisory committee and that it will have, we absolutely wanted to have some, frankly, we want the executive director coming with April every time we have a meeting and giving us an update. That'll just be an agenda item, I think, because I do see, and Scott and I have talked about this, I'm not willing to predict or handicap the reconciliation bill anymore. But if that does pass, in addition to all of the funding that is already out there, there is significant opportunity for Virginia outside of just research. But having a research entity or, hub that can go after that stuff, I think will be really important because it'll allow VNEC and this organization to think even more strategically about, in my honest opinion, how do we get an SMR and advanced reactor somewhere in Virginia? Right? It's like taking the proposal that the EVP and VNEC worked on together on the Build Back Better. How do we take that and then actually implement some of the stuff that was in that, even if we don't win the grant? Because I think there's some real potential incentives that makes the economics on its face look really attractive to the so that, I don't know if that helps, but that's the way I've been thinking about this.
It does, but on the other hand, the hub or VNEC is going to build the SMR in Virginia.
Absolutely.
So, clearly, if the economic incentives are such that it makes it worthwhile for a commercial entity to do that, then they will do that. And they don't really need, there's enough technology available out there right now that they don't really need Virginia universities to be doing research on SMRs.
No, they don't. No, they don't. I agree. No, that's absolutely true, which is why you're absolutely right. That alignment of what is needed versus what is pursued is critical. Although I'd push back a little bit in that I do agree the economics could potentially be set up, but there's there's a lot of things that need to happen in advance of even making a decision to build, even if the economics are good, right?
But
And I think things like the siting studies or options around the state, the infrastructure work, not, well, the workforce, but also the infrastructure to actually build something. Those are things I think VNET could help the commercial industry with.
yeah, and I see that, yes, we need to find more building, but we can help establish a foundation, help whenever the industry is ready to move forward. We can have some things checked off and make it more, Virginia more of a viable place for that. And I think we've been, and so and then there's still steps for us to go forward and do, that's, about the Build Back Better grant. That's why I want to start in the first part of next year, start having some conversations, because even though we don't get the grant, that's okay. I mean, it's not great. I'd love to, for us to get the grant. But I still think there's some steps that we need to take forward to be prepared for a small modular reactor or advanced reactors. I don't want to just say, oh, we didn't get the grant, so we're done. I don't want to do that. I think there's some signs that there's some possibility, and we'll see.
April, do you know if they're looking at the Commonwealth Cyber Initiative as sort of a model or something? You heard of that? I'm on the website right now, and it sounds like this is kind of, it's a lot of similarities in goals. So the CCI, or Commonwealth Cyber Initiative, their website is establishing Virginia as a global center of excellence at the intersection of security, autonomous systems, and data with the mission of research, innovation, workforce development. CCI serves as like a catalyst for the Commonwealth long-term leadership in this sector. So it's not nuclear, but it's a separate state funded. They have 320 faculty members, 21 universities, and a $20 million annual state investment. And then an additional 99,000 sponsored research. So this was just started, and I see has.
I'm going to have to look at that, because I had not heard, especially about the money part, but.
Yeah, so I mean, the state said we really need to invest in cyber and cybersecurity. And this was the mechanism that brought everyone together to do it. And it's a sizable investment. And it sounds like the whole fund is kind of the nuclear equivalent of that.
Yeah, and it's one thing we've been working on, though, is to get to the state and say, hey, we have this resource here. Virginia is a leader. We need to step up and make sure that this next wave of leader is here in Virginia. And we need to be that here on the East Coast.
I know at ECU, the CCI is funding research projects right now.
Likewise, UVA, I believe they also have a physical site up in West Virginia, and they have a few test beds that they operate as resources for researchers at all Virginia universities to use, and then they provide funds to initiate new projects and operations.
Yeah, I'll definitely look at it more and see. I'm probably really conservative on funding. At this point, they would all love $20 million if we get something like that. But I think, money doesn't solve all the problems. I think, I do think we'll probably be asking for money during the next General Assembly. It's not going to be at that level, but I think it's going to give them enough to start. And, maybe we can figure out something more, where we're going to be at the next year. But I think they do need some starting money. I've learned this year, getting money from the general is a great thing, but you also have to be careful what you ask for, because you just may get it, and there's all kinds of other headaches that go with it.
I had a comment. I mean, I was listening to Andrew talk about the pyramid, and I think you're making a very good point. Having, reducing the overhead, we have more people working. And also, as far as, what are these guys gonna do? And it ties in with what Gene was saying, is there this alignment? We've got another organization. So, for consideration, it would seem that to allow for better alignment of the goals and efforts, and also to reduce the overhead, for consideration, maybe this should be a task order or a working group that falls underneath VNECA. That would be my preference, because that way it aligns the goals that are coming down directly from VNECA and prevents, based on the structure, from deviating too much into their own areas that may not be mutually supportive. Comments?
So my only initial thought would be, we don't really have we don't have set up to be the administrator of any funding specifically through VNECA. So I'm wondering if, I think your underlying point's a good one, right? Like, how do we set it up so that there's at least there's alignment and reporting through the existing organizations?
I think we can do it within the proposal itself, because some of the stuff that would take some legislative actions, because remember, we are, the authority formed with the legislation, and under that, with that legislation also form VNEC. But there is some ways I think we can do that and make sure that especially like in their charter, that they write some things that there is, we all go back to, the authority, and work together. It's
I
just
think
another
that would
branch
help.
of family.
If you could somehow align it so
Yeah.
that the goals are the same, I think there has to be some type of codified process in this hub that aligns the efforts.
No, that's good feedback, and I'll make sure to go back to the writer and to the universities and express that. I'm gonna take this whole conversation back
So
to them.
VNECA could actually be your industrial advisory board.
It could, then you wouldn't have to set up a separate. Because ultimately, again, it will be the same people.
So the only,
No, there's.
yeah, the only hesitation I have with that, in theory, I like the concept, but we have, we have to be cognizant of what our public meeting rules are and all that, and I wouldn't want that to hamstring their ability to, pursue projects, get feedback, all that. So it's a good idea, but we may be able to do that allows a little bit more flexibility. Does that make sense, Grant? I can see you over there saying, yeah, we gotta be a little bit careful with that. So, yeah.
Yeah,
For example, we don't control or know about the finances of VNEC.
I was just gonna say that. I mean, there-
That's exactly the same.
Gene,
So it's not our job
Yeah.
to look at their budget, but it's their goals.
you mentioned there's oversight. I would not say that the authority has oversight of VNEC, but I think there's a partnership
Yeah.
between us.
Right.
And I mean, I know we respect that partnership. I'm hoping future leadership will do the same thing, but there is no, I've been questioned on this a lot, the authority has no idea on how and what happens during the board meetings and our conversations, how we spend our money.
I think the key thing we've talked about here, at least the note I was making for take it back to the hub group, is how do we maintain alignment with the goals and process and pursuit of VNECA and VNECA, the existing organizations? We probably could figure out a number of different ways to do that. That's good.
It's very good feedback. I really appreciate it.
I know, Scott, you had.
Yeah, so all the comments and good discussion, so this idea of defining roles, so, I would encourage, because so back to Tom's point, sort of what's the ultimate end goal here of most or all of these groups or the entities involved? It's to try and build something, hopefully in Virginia, or at least have a fair shake at being a player for this. So, SMR, am I correct, wherever you want to define advanced reactor generator? So hang on.
Advanced manufacturing.
Hang on a second. And so I would just employ the group, showing like R&D, to do things that are in that way. And I would argue, I think also the comments, it's not really a technical issues, but perhaps there are technical issues or R&D that can be done within this group to help drive down those costs. Because this is more of an economics problem than a technical problem when I think of advanced reactors and deployment. So there are things you can do, and I've said, like additive manufacturing, different materials, modeling, using those tools in the universities, if that's going to be who's sort of doing, I'll call the work of the hub itself, regardless of how it's governed. So I would just sort of take that back to how you define the roles and responsibilities, not so much from a governance standpoint, although that's extremely important, so we're not having overlap and being duplicative. But that those are the kinds of things they're looking at when it gets back to them, well, what are they gonna go do? And it's those kinds of things with the end goal in mind, perhaps are unique or different. If it's truly a university-centric type group that is trying to meet that, because again, I would argue it's not necessarily a technical challenge with new nuclear, but are there ways we can try down the cost, getting over those technical barriers, to reusing or through R&D and those kinds of things. Again, just something to think about. I did have a question, and I wasn't thinking, Gary sort of sparked this a little bit, or involved my thinking, is there models to follow? And I think, we've seen like with the strategic plan itself, Virginia's kind of been cutting edge, I guess you can say. But other models, and I was thinking, well, what else outside of nuclear? Because there might not be another state or playbook to follow in terms of a hub. But are there other things, whether it's cyber or other industries, even in other states, to sort of help, just sort of guide, what's the best way to go about this, or what's not the best way to go about this too. So I appreciate the time that it takes to sort of get it right the first time, which I think is where you're going with this. It's like, and that's the right approach, I think. So anyway, I just throw it out there, other models, and I wasn't thinking like cyber, but that's a little out of the box. But again, it's a model regardless of how many dollars are at it, with, I think, goals in mind. So anyway, I'll stop there.
No, you're right on, and cost is something the industry has brought up to the universities over and over. Just looking at things that, one of the things also is, we talk about building, but having the manufacturing of these new technologies here. Well, we have the resources to do that, so that's one of the things to look at, looking at the supply chain, seeing what's opportunities there are. But I think on the models, we have talked about that. They bring experience from other projects that they've done. I think one of the things with the working group, we're getting more assistance with that, because there's some groups in the working group that have some experience in doing this as well. So I would encourage them to reach out. They have their own, path of projects they worked on, but we have talked about other projects and reaching out to groups too. But the way we were funded this year were through the Virginia Innovation Partnership. And they've been very helpful as well to give us some thoughts and ideas and making sure that this, go back to longevity. I don't want this to be a hub that just, we have 1 or 2 good years and then it just falls apart. They need to be forward thinking.
Yeah, this is perhaps a hard question, but so I could not agree more that the idea that we will build a small modular reactor here in Virginia is an excellent goal. The communities which have already done that have been reaching out to the various companies that are working on it. Who have actually venture capital funding, they're independently funded. Whose job is it to go and lobby companies to come here to do that? So I know that, for example, BWXT is doing some of the engineering for that, so we even have a foot in the door. But somehow it doesn't seem to be anybody's job to go out and say, why don't you come build one here?
Working on that. That's one of the things I think that they're working. I've talked to some companies, I did the state to talk to some companies. But I think we're finally at the place where we're taking on development partnership, where that they, not to say y'all didn't see that there's value, I'm not saying that yet. But I think there's more engagement. That's why I think the Build Back Better grant is a great example of, I think, the state being more engaged in that this is an opportunity. They brought that grant to us, they worked with us to put the grant. So I think we're getting there. I do think we're getting there. And I know some of those companies, like, for instance, I was on a call with Terra Power not too long ago, And they congratulated me on the work that we have done here. So we are being recognized, but do we need to do a better job of pulling up our sign, we're here to work? Yes, we do.
And that was, so there's that was something that was in the strategic plan too, right? And then I think at least the bones of the proposal for the Build Back Better grant, like Gabriel said, even if that isn't successful, there's pieces of that, I think that honestly, we could make a pitch along with VEDP. To me personally, one of the best tools we could have is if we had a siting study of, not only like retired fossil sites, but other good infrastructure sites that VEDP could literally start going around in their regular economic development work in coordination with VNEC and use as a tool to market. And it's difficult because this isn't a wholesale electricity market too, right? So you have to, obviously, you would have to have buy-in from Dominion or Appalachian Power. But it moves us in that direction, I agree.
Yeah, and that still goes, I think, with the authority and the next mission is to make that happen. And, things like 3 years ago, we had our first meeting, there's 3 years ago, economic development partnership. It is, I do really believe that they see that there's something here and there's a resource that we really need to take care of and make and have Virginia go further.
So I have one other question. It's more of a process question. Does anybody else have questions or input on the hub proposal itself? So let me take this in 2 steps. So in terms of the process for the hub, is there anything, I know you talked about, potential proposals with the legislature is for the next session. Is there components of the proposal, or would this be separate in terms of outreach to both the Virginia legislature, but I would also say to kind of the federal delegation, whether that be DOE or the Virginia delegation? Is that part of the proposal, or would that be something separate as kind of an implementation?
Well, we're trying to get a meeting with the Department of Energy right now. There has been some indication that they would like to meet with us. I actually got word of another thing just earlier this week that Department of Energy recommended VNEC to speak on a panel. So I know they're aware of what we're doing. We would like to sit down with them. We just haven't been able to make that happen yet. But that is something that's been we've been working on trying to get. So I know there's interest from them. But yes, and I have talked to the federal delegation members so let them know what we've been doing. I will be following up with you and just letting them know and making them aware of our effort.
Okay. Then a question on the proposal process. So I would imagine, so when there's a draft to share, I think logistically, and I'll look at Grant and Larry to make sure we're okay here, but it would be probably easiest if you sent that draft to Brandy or, and she distributed it to the authority with comments coming back directly to you. Does that make sense, April? Grant, we're okay there, right?
Yeah, if it's a one-to-one.
Right, one-to-one, not sending it to the whole, not sending it to the whole group, but each individual member can provide comments back to April. And you can, or if you want to deem someone from the proposal writing team, we can always do that too.
No,
Whatever's easiest. And then what will be the kind of finalization and distribution process? Do we know that?
Well, we just have to go back to the working group.
Okay.
I did have a working group meeting. One thing I learned at that working group meeting is that the universities had to have some things more spelled out to have discussions with that larger group. It just, it was, if I will have that, so we'll have to have a working group meeting, get more feedback from them and get changes, and then probably get everyone's edits, have everyone look at it again, and then we will hand it over. I'm timing, I'm just not even going to say what time it's gonna be more. I thought I've known a couple of times. It just hasn't worked as planned, but I, again, will say there's good conversations, and I'm glad that we're having them now rather than a year from now. I think we'll be in a better place.
So I think the next step for this group is to watch for draft to come from Brandy for comments back to April. And then with that, in terms of timing, we'll kind of see where that falls in terms of our first quarter meeting, but also any sort of, because I don't believe that VNECA has any sort of need for approval, voting on the proposal. This is the hub's proposal. I don't think you sign off or not, but the only other thing I would recommend is you do, because we're getting close to where we're going to have a transition to the new legislature and administration. I would talk to them and see what their process is. They're going to want to. This is an opportunity, and you don't want to be surprising anyone as they're coming in. So, in terms of reviews, I know there's been involvement from entities, but just make sure they're in the loop before anything kind of goes out publicly.
I agree.
Yeah, great. Okay. All right. Great. Any other questions on the hub?
And then on a lighter note, I hope that this year, hopefully we don't know yet what the legislature is going to look like, people actually being in the building. We're hoping to have the students back this year and do our day on the hill again. That's been very successful. It's a great thing for us as an industry to take our students on it, being legislators. So hopefully we're in the planning process, but we're waiting to hear what the rules will be.
Yep.
That's it.
That's everybody. Yep. Okay, so the next thing is the annual report status. The annual report, basically, it's been distributed. So- Great. Pretty good. That's,
Can you all just circulate whatever the final?
It's gonna be on
Oh, okay.
everything, all the materials we guys got.
all right, so next up, we'll do the meeting minutes. You have a copy in your packet, so we'll take a few minutes. If anybody has any comments, we'll take them, but. Yes, we do. We're going to do that things here again. You could just, we can check, we'll take them after we talk about it. Okay, do we have any edits or changes? Anybody see anything?
Move we approve.
Motion? Second from Andrew. All in favor? Opposed? All right, great. And so then there's also, the asset inventory, copy is in the packet as well. Just wanted to do a check. Rick, you said we had an update for Liberty.
Yeah, our president is now Gary Krivo. We are also offered master's and PhD programs in engineering.
Maybe just, make sure Bradley has the. Any other updates from?
I already mentioned this to, but, the UVA data in the report is actually correct. It's more recent than what's in this one.
Great, okay, let's make sure, yeah. Any others? Okay. Okay, so, I did want to spend just a couple minutes on planning for next year. So you may have seen the article that Brandy sent out this morning from Sama, who is former chair of VNEC, VCU professor, and now is her exact title at
President of the World Nuclear Association.
Association something. Anyway, I had talked to Sama earlier this year about speaking to this group. She has very good interest now that we know we can kind of do this hybrid mode. She's on the list. I'm going to reach out to her once we have dates for meetings next year to try to get her as a speaker. We've also, as April mentioned, we've had conversations with Dr. Huff at DOE about either her or someone from her leadership team is interested in speaking with VNECA 2 to kind of share their vision. So those are two that are high on the list. Are there other speakers that folks we can talk about that now? Team, the other one we had talked about was, why am I blanking? And I see him like twice a week. Yeah, Steve, sorry. I don't know why I was thinking on it. But I thought it might be worthwhile for Steve, especially following the winter meeting that they have now, to provide an update. I don't know if there are others that we would be interested in putting on the list for invites next year. I know we've said this before, but my goal would be to have at least one speaker at each of our meetings to kick things off.
Third way would be
How about one of the SMR companies?
Stop them off. I'm making a list here.
and then they just, BWC, you guys are open research for years, we get like, even Brampton, just getting little updates from industry, the companies themselves to come and speak and just. Jane Joe would be great. You do good, Joe's.
It'd be jobs. And for what we would talk about.
So, you mentioned TerraPower, not necessarily getting an update on Natrium, but I do think, they're pursuing their demo as a pole replacement. I know I don't know if you caught there was a Nuclear Matters presentation that they did jointly about that project, but I actually wasn't able to tune in. But
Who was the?
Jeff Navin, I know, did it from the TerraPower perspective, but there was a representative from, Pacific Corp, I believe as well, who owns the site that they're looking at converting from. So that might be an interesting angle, kind of that, hold a nuclear discussion. That might be an interesting one.
Yeah, Parapower would be interesting, because they have sort of what called multiple pursuits,
Yeah,
so they're coming at from several different angles and bring
Right.
slightly different reactors. But
all right, well, that's a pretty good list. Maybe what I'll do is I'll pull this together. I'll send it to Brandy. She can distribute it, and if others, will kind of try to keep it as a working list for the next year. But with that, we have a calendar here. Again, I think what, Randy, I will ask you to do is, I would like to try to schedule the first two meetings, the first quarter and the second quarter meeting. But I also think what would be easier, rather than us all going around the room right now, is we send a doodle poll and maybe let's target the end of January, first part of February, initially, Randy, for the first quarter. So maybe we look at like the weeks of, the 24th, 31st, and 7th. Those might be some options. It also gives us some time on the proposal too. And then we look at kind of maybe mid-April, for, Q2. And let's go from there, and at least maybe we can get those on the calendar.
when's the legislature session? What's, people, do you know?
Second Wednesday in January.
So we'd be out. That's fine. I was just curious.
Do you know how long that goes, like this year?
It's a short session.
This is a long
Yeah,
session,
this-
so I think it's to March 12th or 15th, somewhere around then.
So yeah, that would actually be good then. So if we look at
Bills
right after
would
it
be
starts, and then
in-
we could do some
Yeah.
in April, it'd be after they wrapped, so, okay. Good. All right, so we will. Any other nuclear news, company updates, organization updates that you wanted to share? Gotta be good for doing all sorts of things.
Well, Randy pushed it around, but we call it the VWXD Innovation Campus, which is adjacent to our Mount Athos sort of site. We do all our naval reactors, working from other things. So that's part of our nuclear services group, or advanced technologies, which is more things that fit in probably more this group and this group's interest, but a nice grant to the county. And then for Campbell County, and then also, I guess it's called a Senate grant as well. But anyway, we're hoping to attract about 100 new hires, and probably be moving some people over there, and that'll evolve over time, but. Good.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great.
It's going.
It's growing.
Yeah.
So I guess in terms of overall news, probably most people know this, but in the bipartisan infrastructure bill that has been signed, there's two very important things for nuclear in there. One is that the ARDP funding has now been finalized. So it's all authorized all the way to the end of the program, and it's been put into a separate part of the DOE budget, not requiring NE to have to justify it each year. So that's good, and that does pretty much solidify the two ARDP projects plus the risk reduction projects to move forward.
Well, it only funds, just to clarify.
Yeah.
Funds the two,
Right.
tier one, or pathway one, as they call it.
Right.
But
So,
there's all sorts of money.
well,
Possibly.
but the idea
Yes.
that NE doesn't have to keep fighting for it each year is good, because otherwise it ends up detracting from other things that NE is doing or.
Yeah, agreed.
And then, of course, the other piece is a $6 billion fund for credits for plants that are in economic trouble. That probably won't apply to the Virginia plants, because the Virginia plants are not in the wholesale competitive market, although the language in the legislation doesn't require that. So I've been working pretty closely with DOE. They had a group put together to try to figure out how to word this thing. And there'll be an RFI coming out shortly, probably in the next 2 weeks, where DOE is going to publish their expected framework for how this is going to work. And we'll see what happens there. But it does suggest that those plants around the country who anticipate that they may have economic issues over the next, and it's a 4-year program, so it's not intended as a permanent market correction, but it's intended as a stopgap. So those plants that consider that they may have some problems will have an opportunity to apply.
And you may not be able to say because we have to wait for the RFI, but I know one of the issues that the utilities had raised with this concept, as opposed to the tax credit proposal in the Build Back Better framework, is this was an annual program that they would have to reapply for. So if they apply in FY '22, that's great, they can get funding, they have to come back in FY '23. So from a nuclear operator standpoint in a wholesale market, that's hard for them to make long-term decisions because they're in a 3-year look ahead. Anyway, not saying it's not workable, but is there any opportunity to find a fix on that?
Yeah, so actually, the legislation doesn't require that, and so therefore DOE is not proposing it.
Okay, good.
So what it says is that you have to apply for a 4-year period. And there is a requirement that DOE periodically audit, but it doesn't even define what periodically means. So that's up to DOE to determine. So it requires that DOE periodically audit the plants to determine whether economic conditions were such that in the absence of those credits, they would have still been above the line.
Gotcha.
And the RFI is intended to be extraordinarily expansive in the definition of what all those terms mean to reduce the probability of having to go back and make past corrections. Now, of course, if the market changes, and the market may indeed be changing, the price of natural gas is going up. So if the price of natural gas goes up, then a lot of these market dynamics may change anyway. But anyway, the RFI is going to go out. The RFI has been written. It is currently under general counsel review, so I can't really say what's in it, but the intent is to make it as expansive as possible in terms of who can apply, what the definition of economic distress is, and also to make the application process as solid as possible, which is minimizing the opportunities for annual variations, because it is anticipated, if a plant has a refueling outage in a particular year, then their generation is less that year, and they're going to change the economics. They don't really want to do it on an annual basis.
No, that's really good to hear. I'm glad. I know there was some discussion of it, but there was some question of how they would actually logistically be able to do it. So that's really good.
So watch out for the RFI. And the idea was to have it out quickly, and then of course once general counsel gets involved, everything slows down. So. But they definitely, Katie Huck has indicated that she is not going home for Christmas without this thing issued. So
as long as she also issues the Halo one, that would be great.
Yeah.
That one's been
well, they did issue the consent-based siting thing. So,
I know, yeah.
So
They got one out on used fuel, but not on the current.
they're getting stuff.
No, the Halo one's been funny because the back and forth between OMB and then inside Forestall has been.
Oh, yeah. So you mentioned Natrium at Hammer, that's a good thing. The other piece of that probably you haven't heard is that OPG in Canada today announced that they have selected GEH as their company. So that changes the dynamics too, because GEH clearly had a funding problem in terms of developing their product. Now that they have a committed partner, that does make them more competitive with the US market. So once again, changes.
Gender potential SMR, right? Others? And yeah, we talked about it last time, but the Build Back Better proposal, which is the follow-on to the infrastructure bill, has well, the bill that's passed the House, and we'll see where it goes in the Senate, but the energy, especially the nuclear energy provisions, I believe have pretty broad support, even with Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema, who kind of hold the keys to this one. They're significant, but let's not, there's $500 million in there for HALO infrastructure. There is tax incentives that move towards clean energy definitions and emissions definitions as opposed to technology, which is, I think, long-term aligns with the way the market's going. That's great. And there's even production tax credits potentially for existing nuclear, which
Senator Manchin spoke at the ANS meeting yesterday and sounded quite supportive, actually.
yeah, I think, there's the potential they could even expand some of the HALO funding. I think there's a recognition now of not only the domestic, but the geopolitical need to solve that problem finally, so. Good thing. I don't know if
Will they get it passed?
that's, stop, I don't predict that anymore. Ask Senator Manchin. Anything else? Hey, if there aren't any other comments, we will open it up for public comments.
Is this the meeting, later meeting for?
All right, say that again.
How many meetings ago I had this year?
I think this is the fourth.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know I missed last one, so I'm here. Well, I have my scatter decks as usual. I did want to mention that obviously, we're going to continue to have earthquakes here in Virginia, because North Anna also is in Virginia seismic zone. November 9th, we had 2.2 in Cumberland, which is not too far from it. And then November 21st, we had 2.6 in Adigan, which is near the North Carolina border, but it stretches on that whole mountainside. So North Anna is going to continue to be a problem because it also sits on a known fault line that says it's inactive, but things can change. So I think there's always going to be a concern there. It's also a concern with the earthen dam there that holds up the lake. And I think that's going to have to be looked at. So there's a lot of safety issues besides clean energy issues, because clean energy should also have the word safe. And I'm not sure how safe we're going to be long-term with these aging plants in the location, especially in North Anna. Besides that, I want to say that this summer, and still I haven't read anything as of yet, we've had a continuous algae bloom up at North Anna. I actually have friends that live there, and they're kind of annoyed because they're toxic. They're toxic to wildlife, they're toxic to people. And last update I got was that it was still in place of November 10th. And included Upper Pamunkey Branch, including Terry Run and North Anna Lake. So it seems to be pretty pervasive. And then one can't help but ask, when you look at the North Anna's Dominion's wastewater treatment facility, it's been running way past normal. Today, 12/2/21, the lake temp is 55 degrees. And already this morning, they're putting out discharge water is 82.4 degrees. So, I mean, we're talking about a 27.4 degree difference. So maybe it's playing into some of the algae bloom stuff. I'm just saying it's running really high, higher than I've seen it usually. But I think that's an issue. This industry bases itself when it comes to environmental issues as ALARA, as low as reasonably achievable. So this industry needs to stop pocketing the money in areas and maybe invest in where they can do a little bit better than achievable. Because all you got to do is pull up Dominion Energy's North Anna Power Station Radiological Environmental Monitoring Program from January the 1st, 2020 to December 31st, 2020. And just go ahead and scroll on down and go to page 72 to 77. Because what you're going to find is the different agencies that are looking at different quality control, be it soil, water, air, we've got some unacceptable levels. And I wanted to mention this whole thing about CO2 emissions, when talking about the clean energy plan. It's got to be more than just CO2. It's got to be emissions, because every nuclear power plant releases on a routine basis radiation, either through effluents of water, air, particulates, etc. And not even talking about the back end of forever waste storage. And all the energy it takes to do the overpacks and everything else. So trying to promote nuclear energy as a clean energy source is ridiculous. It's an impediment to true clean energy where we need to go, solutions. So I think we're going to find in the long term, we're going to have more and more problems with these plants because you're not going to be able to manage the miles of piping underneath and the corrosion issues. And they're always digging wells in North Anna because tritium pops up here and there. And when you see NA, they're not monitoring for other radionuclides. Those are just tritium wells, I found out. So there's a problem. And I think basically if you scroll down to, and this is from the Department of Energy, several other agencies, so it's not just Dominion doing the monitoring. Y'all got warnings, underwater, warnings for I-9-131, GRB, GRA. Sorry, I don't even know what that is. I have to look it up. I just happened across it. Vegetation. ZN65. That's a warning. CR90. Vegetation cobalt 60. Cobalt 57. Cesium 134. And let's see, what else we have? Not sure what AP is, but those samples came in bad too. Or uranium 234, uranium 238. I'm sorry. If y'all want to sit here and say how clean nuclear energy is, you guys have got a serious problem. Because the issues are, those people around North Anna don't only have just a bloom issue. I think if the studies ever were really carried out, we're going to find more cancer around these places. And to top things up, to make it even worse, is this whole thing about removing the sirens, emergency sirens around our new plants. I was here during our earthquake at Walmart. No one could use their cell phone. Nobody. Nobody. For like 10 minutes. They're telling me that if we stop, I'm hoping they'll keep some of those sirens there. Because if people all of a sudden can't get their little warning on their cell phone, or all the old people like my dad that's 80 years old doesn't use one, nobody will even know. So no, it might be great for the industry, for the public in those areas, not to hear those constant reminders that, hey, we got a new plant here. Yeah, I think it's a bad idea, and I sure hope there's some physically kept available and working, because there's been plenty of time where they find out they're not working. I'm so disgusted with this industry. Y'all want to make more and more nuclear waste. You talk about assets. Where are the detractors? Like our new plants, we have their spent fuel pools have been re-racked to hold more and more waste. How many more are we going to get out and put into overpacks where it's going to be safer in case we have a drain down, an earthquake, or we have a leak and a fire? We have a fire in one of those pools. It's going to be catastrophic. This industry needs to get serious with safety, get better with the containers and canisters we want to use. You know, they're still trying to find a temporary parking lot style waste dump somewhere, some town or city that'll take it. And then we have to build all the infrastructure to take the waste somewhere temporarily. Really? What are we doing for our children, our grandchildren? There's got to be a better solution, and it's not nuclear. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, All right, well, thanks, everybody. Have happy holidays. We'll see you in the new year. Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Yeah.